What a year it's been for horror in 2022. I feel like out of all the genres for both film and television, horror has become the true winner for this year, and in many ways, it's redeemed itself from the somewhat terrible mess of 2021. Last year, we had another Conjuring, another Purge film, another Escape Room, and another M. Night Shyamalan film, all of which were just very okay or lackluster, down to uninspiring and in some cases, god-awful. Don't even get me started on Willy's Wonderland and Spiral. The only really good horror films from 2021 were obscure independent dramas like Titan, Oxygen, and Silent Night. Even Last Night in Soho was great until it came to the mess of a horror act at the end. But for some reason, 2022 was different, and thankfully in a good way. With a year filled with disappointing saturated superheroes from She-Hulk to the unspeakable Morbius, and then terrible video adaptations, no, surprisingly not that one, to me the horror genre took the spotlight, even branching out to some horrific moments on the world's biggest of stages. Almost like horror said to everyone, okay, look at me, I am the captain now. Hell, some of the better elements of Marvel this year came from introducing horror into them. Doctor Strange saw Sam Raimi return, and the horror elements of that sequel were a nice addition to the series. Werewolf by Night was a surprisingly pleasant 1-hour special, and it introduced a set of characters that reminded me of something like Van Helsing in the fun aspects of supernatural horror. And even Sebastian Stan took a break from being Winter Soldier to star in a creepy horror film called Fresh.
Just the way you like it.
Meanwhile, Netflix popularized the sexy serial killer look while also giving the green light to an underrated horror series that I enjoyed, but which I will now never be able to see again. And finally, Jurassic World Dominion proved to be a true horror by terrible design, while Kevin Hart began releasing the 4 promised multi-million-dollar films with Netflix to continue scaring me into never watching one of his films ever again.
Good, bro.
Yeah, I'm alright.
Oh, God!
Ooh, I apologize. Hey,
I'm still gonna do a review on Yelp. Let you guys know that it was...
It seemed like 2022 had horror sprinkled throughout it, and for the most part, it was great. I'm not saying there weren't some bad pieces of horror junk out there that should never be spoken of again, but in terms of delivering something good, fresh, and that stood out amongst the rest, this year had it in spades. But to expand on what I mean, allow me to divulge into some of my favorites in no particular order. And if there's something that I may have missed or should check out, please just let me know down below. So, what worked this year and why? Let's begin. Midnight Mass was easily my favorite work of horror from this year, and even though it's a supernatural story, it's one that feels incredibly grounded in reality, which makes it so much more interesting to watch. The whole premise of Midnight Mass takes place on a small island community, and for me, that alone is one of the smartest decisions made about the series, because while you follow the return of just one character to the island, you end up falling captivated by so many more. The whole series feels like a Stephen King novel, except it's by the genius of Mike Flanagan, who's been trying to get this made for a while as his passion project, and it's really clear to see that on the screen because it feels like it was made by people who actually care a lot for the story and production. The characters are just so genuine and compelling, the cinematography and shot choices are so great, and the supernatural horrific elements are goddamn brilliant. It's horror on so many levels, and for me, it's a must-watch from this year.
hello? Somebody there?
Another great horror piece for television was a bit of a surprise to me as it came from The Simpsons with Treehouse of Horror number 33. Now, the Treehouse of Horror series has always felt like something different to the rest of the seasons, so even though The Simpsons might not ever reach the glory days of past, it could explain why the Treehouse of Horrors are still something to look forward to, because goddamn, this was ever a great one. This year, the episode parodied 3 already interesting horror concepts, but in my opinion, built fantastically upon each one of them. These included the Babadook in the first segment, Death Note in the second, and Westworld in the third. For the Babadook, I love the choice made to explore the relationship between Marge and Maggie, and by extent, the rest of the family in a darker horror context. Looking back on the series as a whole, you can easily see how Marge isn't the most fun character compared to the others, and it's interesting to see how this could translate to pent-up rage that turns into something more horrific.
Maggie, let Mommy in. I know you're in there. Young lady, open the door this instant. Let me in, you little poop machine.
Likewise, for the Death Note segment, I wasn't sure how the writers could build upon the already great premise of a death notebook that kills whoever's name is written on it, but the simple change of having their death be unique each time is, to me, so well thought of. I also particularly love the animation that they did for this segment.
I don't know. Liquefied in a giant blender.
Already did that.
That was pureed. This is a totally different setting. Ugh.
And finally, the Westworld parody at the end became something even more as a way of providing social commentary about how the audience treats the characters as consumable commodities, the effects of meme culture for amusement, and it served as a great way of doing callbacks to classic episodes while also letting us know subtly the problematic remember berries that we have for nostalgia. All in all, a surprisingly great episode.
T-shirt, you lovable killbots!
Ah! There's too many! There aren't enough t-shirts in the world to save us!
Moving to the big screen, Barbarian was another great surprise that kind of flew under the radar for the most part, and to me, it was driven a lot by the mystery and word of mouth of what it was. In some ways, this reminded me a lot of the marketing for Paranormal Activity, and when it was actually being promoted even more so, I loved that the creative team behind it decided to just call it the new Justin Long movie, which is hilarious in more ways than one. While there are still some issues I have with the film, overall, I believe the pros heavily outweigh the cons. This film has a great sense of atmosphere and of tone, especially in the opening act alone, but I also really enjoyed how surprisingly funny it was in the moments where it's also really terrifying. This is a debut feature, and say what you want about some of the production or narrative choices, this to me is as good as you can get for a first-time horror film.
Hey. The laundry's still in wash. But I thought, well, I'm wide awake, so it's gonna be a bit nut. I thought I'm gonna have some of this here wine, but I didn't want to open it before you got out of the shower because I noticed you didn't drink your tea, and well, I totally get that, by the way. I mean, you don't know me, and this is a fucking really weird situation. It makes total sense, but I thought that you know, you might want some of this, but if I open it while you weren't here, I'm sorry, I'm rambling. Jesus Christ. I thought you wouldn't want any if you didn't see me open it, so I waited.
Out of all the work that's come out this year, I feel like Nope was the most misunderstood horror piece. It's one of the most polarizing films that's come out this year because I've seen people either really love it or just completely hate it. For me, I fall somewhere towards the latter. My only real issue is with some of the monster design at the end, which doesn't look as scary as the rest of the film really feels. But I also know that's not the point, and the film works so well for everything else. Not only does it give a brilliant fresh take on an overused sci-fi horror device, but it also includes some incredibly dark scenes and layers upon layers of symbolism, social commentary, and cleverly written details throughout the plot. I found myself reading endless notes and pickups on what this meant here and how this thing tied in with this, that it really made me appreciate how much more depth there was to this film, while also never toning down the horror elements to it. I know most people still love Get Out, but this to me is my favorite Jordan Peele film to date, and I'm glad that he's living up to all the hype and money the big studios are willing to give him. Bonus points for that Akira motorcycle slide. Men was another horror film that seemed to polarize audiences, even though I loved how bizarre and strange it was. This is one of those films that works horror in both what the character is feeling internally and through the reflections externally, and I for one was really blown away by this nightmarish juxtaposition throughout. I won't be watching it again because I don't want to go through that hellish experience a second time, but that doesn't mean it's not fantastic. The premise is great, the performances are perfect, and the last act is probably the most disturbing thing I will see all year. Simple but powerful.
Hello.
Who are you?
I'm Harper.
Want to play a game? Hide and seek? You hide, I'll seek.
I don't think I can.
You can't hide. Go on. I bet you're good at it.
The Black Phone is another film with a simple premise, but that does incredibly well for what it has. As a story about a phone that can communicate with the dead, I loved that this showed a different take on the ghost trope by mixing in a very real element to it with the situation of being kidnapped by a child killer. Some people have complained about the fact that it doesn't exactly explain why this is possible and that they want some more backstory or lore explaining how the phone works, but for me, it's the minimalism that is so much better. You don't need to know why or how the phone operates to enjoy the story, because again, that's not the point. Just accept the plot device and move on with the actual narrative, which is where the more interesting actions occur. My only real gripe is for a film that thrives on minimalism, they could have chosen not to show the characters of the dead and just leave it at their voices, which to me would have been more powerful and disturbing, but overall, it's still a refreshing take.
Are you Griffin?
Who?
Griffin Stagg.
Probably. It's all a little hazy, but I imagine you know all our names.
Every kid does. I didn't know you.
Nobody did. You spend so many years invisible, and then every kid in the state knows your name. You don't have much time.
Why hasn't he killed me?
You won't play the game. You have to play the game. If you don't play, he can't win.
What game?
Naughty Boy. If you don't play Naughty Boy, the grabber can't beat you. And if he can't beat you, he can't move on to the next part. And the next part of Naughty Boy was his favorite part.
Speaking of refreshing takes, there was also a new Hellraiser film, and it surprisingly lived up to its name. The director David Bruckner is one of my favorite horror directors of late, with some great bodies of work such as Amateur Night from the first VHS film and The Night House, and I'm glad to see him continuing to expand upon his skills as a director here. Some of the sequences in this film are absolutely horrifying because they feel like you're watching a nightmare unfold right before your eyes. The way characters transition transition into other dimensions left me with some very lasting impressions, and I never want to see them ever again. I also love the choices with some of the characters in this film, particularly at the end with what happens for the arc of the protagonist. There's a little bit more to this horror film than just scares, and I appreciate the effort to actually write three-dimensional characters in horror films for once. Interesting characters in horror films is also the biggest thing for the film Bodies, 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 which takes a bunch of characters and actually makes each of them feel unique and fun to watch. This is a horror film that leans into the classic trope of having young, dumb adults be stuck in one place while they are hunted down one by one, but it actually turns into a different twist that I wasn't really expecting. In my view, this is really a horror film about the nature of being a human when you're put into a truly fight or flight situation, as well as the horror of dealing with your own personal struggles in an environment that isn't necessarily helpful. Funny, dark, and another pleasant surprise from this year.
I'm so sorry. That's really serious. Mental health is a really serious issue. I mean, I've never actually said this to anyone, but I have body dysmorphia.
Oh my God, shut the fuck up, Alice.
Watcher is a movie about someone who watches people, and while that might seem boring on the surface, it never really feels like that. The tension is so good in this film, and I really loved the overall mood and build-up of the story and production. Everything feels so dynamic and alive in a scary way, which is echoed by the sequence of events for the protagonist. It starts as a snowball before becoming an avalanche, and nowhere along the line did I ever feel bored at what was happening. I feel like people might be complaining about the slow burn nature, but for me, it's the little nuances and details that keep the pace feeling always upbeat. I was always looking for something hidden in the background, and I really like how the film puts you in the shoes of the main character. Even just the simple design choice of her being in a completely foreign country makes you too feel like a stranger in a different world, where you always feel like you're being watched. All My Friends Hate Me is the scariest film I've seen this year, and it does so without even using anything remotely related to monsters, because the monster here isn't a person or a creature. It's something more terrifying, your own social anxiety and insecurities.
Oh, hell no!
I love that this film works in two ways, as for some people, this is a hilarious comedy, but for others, it's truly horrifying. I'm not the most anxious or insecure person, but Jesus Christ, did this film make me relate to so many moments where I was replaying situations of my own social interactions, where I was constantly scrutinizing every detail of a situation, of who said what and in what kind of manner. And yes, I know this film is intended to veer a little bit towards the social anxious side, where it makes people do bad things that can kind of look quote-unquote funny, but it's perfect for capturing that internal horror we all feel when we do something wrong around our friends. So while maybe this is only a horror film for those with heightened social sensitivity, even then, I wholeheartedly believe it works as a dramatic film regardless, while also still being my favorite horror film from this year.
fucking make an effort, mate.
Halloween Ends is a movie where Halloween finally ends. It's the possible series conclusion to the infamous Michael Myers Halloween franchise, and while I still have issues with certain elements, after letting it sit, I can't help but admire some of the refreshing narrative choices it made. The biggest part is the decision to look into the nature of evil itself, and if it can be transferred or bred from an environment that is conducive to doing so. For this, the journey of our main character, who falls under tragic circumstances and is haunted for doing so, makes the film so different compared to the other Halloween films, but in a great way. It makes you kind of think, if I was put into this situation, would I turn to darkness? I mean, how could I not perhaps? Or what would it take for someone to become evil in that way? It gives you great context to perhaps anyone who turns from good to bad, and I love that this film explored this idea in a setting like the Halloween franchise, because goddamn are the town and the people in it a whole breeding ground for bringing out the worst in someone. It's hard to see why more people in that town didn't turn to the dark side, but at the very least, what we got was a film that mixed up the same Halloween formula in a good way.
Hey, you said you were gonna call. You were gonna call, but you didn't call it.
No, I owe you a call.
Did I do something wrong?
I'm with someone.
Oh. Oops. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for the intrusion. Well, you know, it's Joe Grillo's. Hey, Joe. Hey. Joe Grillo's birthday today, and Joe Ross, he made a sponge cake. You two want to stop by and get a slice after whatever you guys are doing?
Good.
Okay, you're good. Well, let me tell you, it's change your mind.
He said we're good.
Hey, buddy, you got a problem?
We're good.
So yeah, great job 2022. What a refreshing year for horror, with a load of different kind of originals, but also great new takes on old concepts, and thankfully a lot less of your sequels to popular franchises with the same kind of formulaic beats and boring jump scares. Now all eyes turn to 2023, and man am I excited after this year. So what do we have that's going to take it from here? Surely this is the new renaissance for the horror, right? Wait, what? No. Please. Not another one.
Jesus fucking Christ.
Yeah.
What did we learn, Palmer?
I don't know, sir.
I don't fucking know either. I guess we learned not to do it again.
Yes, sir.
I'm fucked if I know what we did.
Yes, sir. It's hard to say.